It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 10, printed in Part B of House Report 116-383. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
As I have an amendment at the desk, I stand and seek recognition.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 10, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-383, offered by Mr. Cohen of Tennessee.
Pursuant to House Resolution 811, the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, and the member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment creates a specific time period for credit reporting agencies to change a consumer's credit report after consecutive payments have been made on certain private education loans. This bill offers credit rehabilitation for distressed private education loan borrowers. My amendment simply states that once a consumer has made the consecutive payments outlined in the standardized reporting codes, the Consumer Reporting Agency must update a consumer's report immediately or within 5 business days at the most. Credit reports and credit scores are tied to so many important factors in consumers' lives. They determine interest rates on mortgages, bank loans, and credit cards, deposits for rent, and even lower insurance premiums. Every day counts. Consumers shouldn't have to wait in limbo, not knowing exactly when a charge is going to be removed from their credit report, especially if they've been making consecutive payments and meet the criteria to have it removed. This amendment is supported by the National Consumer Law Center, who stated, quote, putting a specific time frame for compliance is a good idea. It provides clarity on when actions needs to be taken for both compliance and enforcement purposes. It also ensures borrowers will get the benefits of the law promptly. I'd like to thank Chairwoman Waters, I'd like to thank Mr. Lawson, Congresswoman Presley, and the Financial Services Committee staff, especially Yana Mills, Glenn Sears, Avi Malik, Clement Aboni, and Lisa Pito for all their hard work on this issue. I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment, and I would now like to yield a minute to the sponsor of this comprehensive bill. Is Ms. Presley here? Oh, good. So I yield a minute to Ms. Presley of Massachusetts.
The gentlelady from Massachusetts is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. My bill, the Comprehensive Credit Act, works will greatly improve a fundamentally flawed credit reporting system, providing much-needed relief for families across the country. It works to protect consumers from unfair and misleading credit reporting practices, affirming the right of all Americans to an equitable and transparent credit reporting process. My bill takes the burden off of consumers while holding credit reporting agencies accountable and restoring fairness to the system. I want to thank my colleague from Tennessee for offering this amendment. CRAs are all too quick to add penalties and negative marks to credit reports, but the same urgency never seems to be applied to improving those reports. Once borrowers take the steps prescribed in this bill to improve their credit report, they deserve to have the report updated to reflect that in a reasonable time frame. Credit scores are meant to be predictive, and the best predictor of future behavior is their most recent behavior. Our bill takes the burden off of consumers while holding debt reporting agencies accountable and restoring fairness to the system. This amendment would further strengthen our bill by ensuring that these changes happen in a timely manner. I am proud to support this amendment. I urge my colleagues to do the same, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I claim time in opposition. I'm opposed to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized.
Okay, it sounds like a bit of a broken record, but this amendment does 2 things. First, it continues to undermine the ability of private lenders to negotiate terms of their loans with student borrowers. Second, it continues the bill's theme of removing negative information, even if accurate, from credit scores and credit reports. Now, it was the decision by a Democrat House, Democrat Senate, a Democrat President that has saddled a generation, in fact 2 generations of students with this massive federally administered student loan program. This bill only deals with the 8% that's in the private marketplace and is trying to put bad rules there to tank that final 8%, when in reality we should be focused on the 92% that the federal government has saddled, the 92% that is the federally subsidized, the federally, not even subsidized, that's not the right word, the federally administered, the federal student loan program. Now, they want to remove predictive information that will lead to students taking on even more debt. We should be addressing the underlying factors that are causing the crisis, like the rising cost of higher education, the lack of underwriting standards in the federal program. Instead, we're going to weaken the standards in the private market, the part of the marketplace that's actually working really, really well. You only have default rates or folks that are not paying at 2% or less. And in the federal program, we have double digits that are in the same sort of category. So the underlying bill requires consumer reporting agencies to develop and use reporting codes to reflect a borrower's participation in the credit rehabilitation program. The amendment would require these codes to be removed no later than 5 days after the consumer makes 9 payments in 10 months. Why 9 payments in 10 months? As I said in the last time I spoke about this, 9 payments in 10 months, well, because that kind of feels right. Apparently, that's kind of what we determined in the committee debate. Not that people have paid every month, but, they paid 9 out of 10 months. So what we're talking about here is not science in the underlying bill. And in fact, the 5-day period, I'm not sure how the sponsor came up with that, but this amendment expedites the requirement of a flawed program within the bill. So not making a titanic change, a major change to the bill, but it's a bad program that he's basically speeding up, in my view, a bad program, in my view, that he is obviously trying to enact more quickly. Under this amendment, there would be no record of the borrower ever being delinquent or been in default. So let's go back to the private student loan market statistics. Again, 2% in the private student loan marketplace are in default of their loans compared to the federal student loan program, which has a default rate of 18%. Fannie and Freddie didn't have a default rate that high, and they went into, they got nationalized as a result of the financial crisis and sparked a financial crisis. We have 18% that are in default in the student loan program. So why are we messing with this small program when we should be taking on this bigger issue that is one that is a major struggle? And there are a lot of ideas on both sides of the aisle for how we deal with that. So we shouldn't be weakening underwriting standards either in the federal program or in the private program. We should have strong underwriting standards. We should not lead to more financial instability, but a fairly structured and smart marketplace. So with that, I oppose this amendment and, again, reiterate that this amendment is about speeding up a bad program that's deeply flawed in the underlying bill, and that's why I oppose it. And so with that, reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, federal student loans already have the option to rehabilitate the loan after the borrower has made 9 out of 10 consecutive on-time payments. H.R. 3621 simply brings private student loans in line with federal student loans. So 9 out of 10, it's not science like climate change is, but it's pretty good, and it's based on current law for federal student loans. Secondly, I would submit, don't try to make the good, the perfect, the enemy of the good. And I was here for 8 years, the minority, and I don't remember the majority bringing any bills to help consumers on any student loans or anything at all. Fortunately, we're in the majority, and we're bringing bills to help consumers, and this bill helps people with student loans. And I once again reiterate my urge for people to support this. And I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
May I inquire how much time is remaining on both sides?
Gentleman from North Carolina has 30 seconds. And the gentleman from Tennessee has 1 1/4 minutes.
I reserve, and because I have the right to close.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Simply for the college students, for the debtors, for fairness, for justice, pass this bill, pass this amendment, and I close.
Gentleman yields back.
So,
Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Chair, this is more aggressive than the bad federal student loan program. If you're a delinquent borrower, you cannot access this like-kind program. And what this is saying, what this amendment is saying is you're a delinquent borrower, you can get at the front of the line and get that waived away as if you had been paying the whole time. So this is a bad idea. If you want to address the problem, let's address the cost of college, not doing this gamesmanship of trying to socialize on the back end through the credit scores and credit reporting agencies. And with that, I oppose the amendment and yield back.
Gentleman from North Carolina yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Tennessee. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Okay, it is now in order to consider amendment number 11, printed in Part B of House Report 116-383. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have another amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 11, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-383, offered by Mr. Cohen of Tennessee.
Pursuant to House Resolution 811, the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, I'd just like to make some closing remarks on the previous argument. The gentleman is right. We need to make college more affordable. And I passed a bill in Tennessee when I was a senator, a referendum on the ballot that's raised over $5 billion to send kids to college in Tennessee. $5 billion free scholarship money. So, yes, I don't talk the talk, I walk the walk. For this amendment, thank you. My amendment makes it unequivocally clear that credit reports should not be used as the sole reason for the denial of employment. This amendment is for the countless constituents who have contacted my office with disturbing stories of being denied a job opportunity because of their credit report. This amendment is for the many people in this country who are currently in a vicious cycle. To pay down their debt, they need a job, but they can't get hired because of their debt. According to the Society for Human Resources Management, 43% of employers are conducting pre-employment credit checks, claiming that a potential employee's credit score is somehow an accurate predictor of future job performance. Nobody says that. Like nobody says that you have to have a crime in an impeachment article to impeach a president. Abuse of power is sufficient. Yet, there's not been any proof that a credit report or a credit score can predict how an employee will perform. None whatsoever. A credit report doesn't tell the whole story. Maybe a person has had a long stretch of unemployment. Maybe they unexpectedly had a health or a medical crisis. This practice has had a disproportionate impact on some of our most vulnerable, credit-challenged citizens, recent college grads, divorced women, low-income families, senior citizens, and minorities. Everyone deserves the opportunity to begin rebuilding their credit history by obtaining employment. We should be doing everything in our power to help people find jobs during these tough economic times, not hinder them. Making sure credit reports are not used as a means for denial of employment has been a very important issue to me in my office. And I've introduced a bill, the Equal Employment for All Act, every Congress for the last 11 years. Unfortunately, in 8 of those years, we were in the minority, and so we couldn't get a hearing. But now, Mr. Lawson has brought a bill, which I appreciate greatly, and he's on the committee, and this issue is now before us. What matters most is that important issues like this are addressed and fixed by Congress and get to the floor for a vote. I would like to thank Mr. Lawson, and I'd also like to go back and thank my former staffer, Michael Fulton, who worked tirelessly on the Equal Employment for All Act and the Free Access to Credit Scores Act. I'm happy to see that language to provide free credit scores is also included in the Comprehensive Credit Act. I want to thank again Chairman Waters and the dedicated staff on the Financial Services Committee. And I encourage all of my colleagues to support my amendment and vote for the overall bill. And I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
To claim time in opposition, I'm opposed.
Gentleman is recognized.
This amendment is more of the same, Mr. Chair. It prevents employers from identifying and fulfilling the needs of their companies. Now, the use of a credit score, you could argue, is not perfect for every job, but there are certain cases where that would, in fact, be a reasonable thing and a reasonable limitation on employment. And I would ask the amendment sponsor if that is the case. Are there reasonable limitations that we could find here for the types of employment where a credit report may be helpful to the employer? I would ask the bill sponsor, Mr. Cohen of Tennessee, who's here in the room.
Excuse me, I didn't hear anything like I didn't hear anything.
Well, then let me ask the question once again. So your amendment says you cannot use the credit report for anything related to hiring. Is that correct?
Right.
I understand that correctly. Is there any reasonable limitation as an employer? Is there any reasonable expectation for using a credit report in a hiring process, in your view?
I'm still having trouble hearing. Like in the 8 years when I was the minority, I couldn't hear the majority party give me a chance to bring this to a vote. But I don't think the answer is yes. The answer is no.
Reclaiming my time. If the amendment sponsor doesn't wish to engage in debate, then don't come to the House floor, Mr. Chair, unless you want to engage in a debate. I'm offering a reasonable question. The gentleman may be so far in left field he can't hear me in this chamber, but I would say this. As an employer, if you're handling cash, as an example, every day, is it a reasonable thing to check somebody's credit report to see if somebody has perhaps, I don't know, had problems with cash or is massively in debt or has not paid their bills? Is that a reasonable thing? Is it a reasonable thing if you get hired by the FBI to know that you have massive debt and therefore could fall victim to extortion? I think there's a reasonable limitation. And what the gentleman is already exposed with is unwillingness to even engage in a simple colloquy. The gentleman's been around this House long enough to know this general process, but he doesn't want to answer the question. The reason why he doesn't want to answer the question is he doesn't believe any employer should be able to look at a consumer credit report for any hiring procedure, and I think that's patently absurd, Mr. Chair. So if employers have a real fear that hiring or retaining an individual can jeopardize the integrity of an institution, I think they should be able to check a credit report. Just like in certain circumstances, somebody's criminal background could be harmful. I'll give you an example, elder abuse. Elder abuse. I think it's reasonable to know if somebody has committed a violent crime or has extorted money from people. I think that's a reasonable circumstance, is it not? So I would say this. I offered a reasonable opportunity for a debate on this. This is an absurd amendment that should be rejected. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It can't be the sole reason for denying a job, number one. That's what the bill says. And there are exemptions for circumstances when federal, state, or local law call for it or national security clearance. Indeed, I think that if you're an administrator, if you're over, say, the foreign policy of the United States and the Defense Department, people should know if you have great debts to, like, Russia or something. People should have a right to know that because it could relate to your employment. But that's another issue. And right now, I'd like to yield a minute to Ms. Jackson Lee from Texas.
I thank the gentleman very much. I rise to support the underlying bill by Representative Presley and thank her for outstanding leadership. And I rise in particular to support the reasonable, smart amendment of Mr. Cohen. It says very clearly that it is a sole reason. Let me be clear again to my good friend. A credit score or owing bills is not criminal. It's not a criminal act. It doesn't in any way diminish your ability to do your job. 1% of the American people own 90% of the wealth. That means that students with debt and millennials mostly are not in that category. That means that you are not encouraging leadership if you use a credit score as the sole reason for denying an able leader that happens to be a millennial to get a job. I'm outraged and insulted by the premise. Mr. Cohen's amendment is a smart amendment that indicates give these individuals a chance as the underlying bill by Ms. Presley. I rise enthusiastically to give relief to millennials and those with major student debt, one, under this act, and two, under Mr. Cohen's amendment, not to deny them a job. I support the Cohen amendment. I support the underlying bill by Ms. Presley, the Credit Act, and I believe we should vote yes on that amendment,
Gentleman,
and
his
yes on the
time
bill.
has expired.
Do our job for the millennials. I yield back.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Are you ready to close? I say, are you ready to close?
Huh?
Are you
the chair-
ready to learn if
chair-
our president has debts to Russia before he can count the
Will
money?
the chair
Question is, are you
inquire
ready
the
to
chair
close?
how much time remains on both sides?
But they have the right to close.
Gentleman from North Carolina, a minute and a half. The gentleman from Tennessee has 30 seconds.
I'll reserve.
Close, and I intend to do so.
Gentleman from North Carolina has the right to close. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
So the express purpose of this amendment in legislative text says that you cannot use a consumer credit report or the information therein to deny employment. And the gentleman in the very debate, Mr. Chair, just said that he thinks some different standard. But that's not what this amendment does. This is a deeply flawed amendment that has not been, I think it's been thought through, because the gentleman wants to ban every potential limitation on employment, even in sensitive industries, even dealing with the elderly, even dealing with children. And I think that is way too far to the left and out of the mainstream. And this amendment is not conforming with the rhetoric that he used on the floor. In fact, it's much more far-reaching. But it's also quite fitting with the overall bill, because the overall bill is about socializing credit. And if you socialize credit, you can't use any form or factor. And so I think this is really problematic. If employers have a real fear that hiring an individual can jeopardize the integrity of an institution, for instance, a financial institution, or cause harm to the very people they're trying to care for, or share sensitive information on their customers, then they should have the opportunity to not hire those people that will cause harm or wreck our financial system. So this is a way out left amendment, but it's a way out left bill. So while I oppose it, I wish the gentleman well and wish that we could actually engage in some reasonable debate like I had with other members, but I realize not all members are the same, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Tennessee. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.